Welcome to episode 455 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and he's Emile Evanesian. And Emile, unfortunately, 0-0 against Girona. That's what we're talking about today. And, I mean, we could probably try to make this show about 48 seconds or a minute and a half and just say, bleh, and just be in and out. But I think there's actually some more interesting stuff to talk about and complaints or how serious to actually take the draw and stuff like that, because honestly, having sat on it, having done the 5 headlines, I'm not that outraged that it was a 0-0 at home against Girona, because I think where we begin is with the walking wounded and with the players missing. And as odd as it sounds, I'll let you speak first, but I'm then going to back up my hot take, if you will, that I was more concerned, or not say more concerned, but I felt like the players who were missing in Christensen, Dembele, Pedri, and Frankie de Jong, I felt like their absence was felt larger in Girona than it was against Real Madrid in El Clasico. And again, I can back that up, but I'll let you. What did you think of the overall draw first?
A little bit flat and frustrating in a way that a lot of these performances have been. Many of them have wound up with Barca finding a goal somewhere, and the fact is that the first half, I don't know if it was a scintillating first half performance, but I was fairly encouraged by the first half, and Barca were making, at least controlling the ball and putting on, if not putting on some pressure, at least infiltrating the more dangerous parts of the pitch. And it was just, I think we were like 7 or 8 minutes into the second half where I got this kind of creeping sense of dread where I was like, oh my God, like it's just, here comes the sort of the sad trombone, it's just, now we're in for a flat second half. And in fact, we were, and I don't know. I mean, I think, and there were a couple of players who, I don't even know if anyone necessarily played well, but, there were 3-4 guys who I thought, at least acquitted themselves decently. And, and we know that Barca were lucky to get out, with the 0-0 that they did. But I mean, if anything, it's a slightly different flavor of the manner of performance we've been seeing virtually all season. So I don't know. I'm not. I find it very difficult to get shocked and outraged. Also, if you want to dig for silver linings, in spite of this, Barca picked up a point on Real Madrid in the league table this weekend. So there's that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a shrug. It was unfortunate, but I mean, Girona played very well. I mean, they're well coached. They were disciplined. They were aggressive. They were selectively aggressive at the right times. They, even when Barca were playing well, they weren't putting them under immense pressure. So it's not like Barca, just whiffed on sitter after sitter. I mean, this was a decent team that that's well coached and organized, and they put in a solid performance. And I mean, if anything, Girona is probably a little bit annoyed that they didn't come away with 3 points.
Well, yeah, I will say maybe a little addendum to the hot take I had, which I'll explain now, in that I felt like, the drop off from Alonso's performance against Real Madrid to what Christensen would have given you is a bigger drop off than the two, what could have been very costly errors that Eric Garcia made yesterday against Girona, or where I felt like, if Christensen's in Girona, Barcelona still get a clean sheet, and that has kind of been the case in the Liga this season. That XG and all that stuff says that Barcelona have been very lucky, and looking at Castellanos' miss, yes, they have been very fortunate. And Eric Garcia twice again yesterday, it completely cooked, steps forward. But Barcelona, their defensive, and not only luck, but their defensive acumen to be able to make sure that those are the only two opportunities that the other team has, and then Ter Stegen doing what he's done this season, again, kind of curbing that XG and saying, okay, well, actually, there's the Ter Stegen factor to also factor in there, especially in the first half of the season, that Barcelona is able to survive those things. So Christensen, I think, would be the one exception. Him being replacing Alonso for El Clasico, I think, would have been maybe even a different result. That's how big that would have been. And then, of course, Dembele and Rafinha, we saw that against El Clasico. We saw that again against Girona. But I think the reason I say that, too, is because in, we'll say, big matches or big moments in Europe, in against Real Madrid, moments are what it all comes down to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those a header here, a free kick here, or something ball bouncing in a certain way, VAR, something happening, and the like. But when it comes to Liga, and I think this makes my job a little easier with the 5 headlines over the years, is that in the Liga, you come in with consistency, and that's why Barcelona winning Liga. That's why it's so important, consistency. But you come in with a game plan, you come in with your style much more than those big matches. In the big matches, it's all about getting the result in any way you can. And in the Liga, it's this is the way we want to play. This is our ideas. Let's try to put those forward against the other team. And Girona was doing the same thing. And I think yesterday, you could see for Barcelona, I mean, very much like El Clasico, but you could see for Barcelona the difference that Dembele probably would have made. The difference, certainly, that Pedri would have made in that game, that Frankie de Jong would have made in that game by substituting those players in. Again, I think the argument is that, well, if you put those players in El Clasico, that might be an entirely different result. But I also think that Barcelona might have got a result earlier in El Clasico in that first half if the moments had gone their way. But this game against Girona, it just felt like the team that was playing, and this is the doldrum, this is the boring part of that draw yesterday for Barcelona's sense. Even though it was up and down, end to end, it wasn't boring, but in the same way, that feeling of dread you got was, I think, what all Culés had, that it was like, wait a second, this game is end to end. It feels like there's supposed to be a lot of chances. Barcelona are outshooting their opponent 18-5, 3-0 on target, and yet it just kind of feels like they're running in mud and they're not up to it. It's not good enough. And I think those players, even if Barcelona had played very listlessly with the better players, that being De Jong and Pedri in the midfield and Dembele on the right, you still get the sense that those 3 in particular would have gotten you over the line, regardless. Okay, and then the one thing I will say about these players too, the other unfortunate bad news related to them, before we really get into who actually did play, is that Dembele, who was originally planned to be ready for the second leg against Manchester United, he now has a return date that is up in the air, bringing questions and concerns about his fitness again. Where it felt like it was put to bed completely, but it's back again. Pedri was supposed to be ready for El Clasico, the one in March, and now he is expected to return for Atletico Madrid after the setback he had in training. Frankie de Jong was also going to be ready for El Clasico, but that being the Copa del Rey last week. Now he will likely be ready for Getafe this weekend. And even if he's not ready for Getafe, it'll be Atletico Madrid. I think Christensen will be ready at the end of the month against Rayo Vallecano, and that was always going to be a few weeks for him. But it really is unfortunate because you have at least 3 of the 4 players that we just mentioned have all relapsed in their injuries. And we had a listener question last time you were on, Emile, about Ricard Pruna and the medical staff and putting faith in them. And it certainly is frustrating. But I do think that these injuries are certainly an indictment of the fact that Barcelona only go 12 to 13 players deep that Xavi trusts. And I think that really does wind up weighing on the players that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this kind of in relation to that, and I think to one of the other listener questions that we did. But the reality is that the sort of the top tier sort of world class level player depth at this version of Barcelona, we'll take Ter Stegen out of it, but even if you take Ter Stegen, it goes maybe 14, 15 players, and there just isn't, when you lose 4 top flight players. I mean, you can either call them world class, or they would certainly be starting for this team, or however you want to classify those 4. That puts a huge dent in you. I mean, that would put a dent in any team. I mean, even the PSGs and Man Cities and the ultra deep teams of the world, they would feel that. And Barca just simply don't have the top tier depth that, for instance, a Man City does, or or anyone like that. And then I think, and it also, a little bit of that even extends to the guys that are there. So I mean, you see, whether now it appears that Lewandowski is playing through pain or injury, and there isn't, I thought, and this is hardly a hot take, but for the first half at least, I thought Ansu looked good, for a good chunk of the first half yesterday, but other than that, the four primary, attacking players being him, Lewandowski, Rafinha, and Ferran Torres, just, I don't know, made virtually no impact. I mean, it was just they posed minimal threat. I mean, Rafinha a couple of times threatened to get into a decent position and then endeavored to not really do so. But so you kind of see that the depth. It's not even the guys that are out, but you have players. It would be nice to give Lewandowski a bit of a break if you had a legitimate number 9. Yeah, and where you also don't have to steal from the depth that you don't really have at the other
And I will
positions.
mention that we are going to be focusing heavily on wing play on the second show this week. So especially with Rafinha, I'm actually going to kick the can down the road on that. We're not really going to go into what we saw or lack thereof against Girona for Rafinha, but I will focus on Lewandowski here because even though we will talk about a bit about him on Thursday with the wing play in relation to that, so he has this back injury, and apparently even in training he's wearing this back belt and he's been limited in training in the last week. And so those are basically those what came out afterwards. It's one of those, LeBron James, like, oh, he actually was playing with one foot missing,
and his
in
foot's
the whole
actually
playoff
broken or something. Yeah,
it was actually broken in the playoffs. Well, it was actually his hand, right? It was that was
Yeah.
all back in the Warriors years. Yeah.
Yep.
But anyway, yeah. So he's but yeah, for Lewandowski, that now not saying it makes a lot more sense, but it does make sense that this 34-year-old is dealing with a back injury, and that has hampered his ability, especially to hold up play, which was never really his game, but it has been subpar in the last few months. So we don't know where and when that injury really did begin to occur. It could be a long time coming, but also could have been a week or two, which doesn't really explain prior to. But what's interesting about Lewandowski is I think we're already beginning this referendum on the choice to spend as much as the club did to Bayern Munich on Lewandowski. Because I think there's an argument being made with him in the spring here and with him in Europe that what was he bought for, right? If he was bought for those European nights, for El Clasico, for Bayern Munich, if he was bought for those matches, then this is obviously a terrifying transfer because not only did he not do it this year in year 1 of his contract, but he now has an additional 3 years on this contract to not only age, but if this is who he is, then you're in trouble, locked in for 20 or 21 million euros every season. And he will be if De Jong is able to renegotiate and Busquets is off the books and Alba renegotiates. Lewandowski then next season becomes the highest paid player on the team. And again, if he's not getting you those European goals, then you've got an issue. Now, if Messi comes back, you have a whole thing about, which guy is supposed to be the one that's scoring those European goals. But the other counter argument to that immediately is that if he was bought to win you La Liga and to get a trophy, because remember, setting the expectations into this season, that if the goal was to get a trophy, Lewandowski scored enough goals, Ter Stegen and Araujo and Koundé and Christensen made enough stops, Balde increased his play enough, as did Gabi. Pedri was good enough on the field for long enough. The same thing with Dembele before they got injured. And Frankie de Jong found his way into the team for a long enough time. And Busquets kept his level high enough that you were able to win the Liga. And those were the really important foundational parts of why Barcelona won the Liga this season. So if that's why you bought him, to also take off pressure from Ansu and Ferran, because imagine if Lewandowski wasn't bought, right? The pressure that would exist on not only Ansu and Ferran Torres, and then Dembele for getting hurt again, and Rafinha, but also from Pedri for his lack of assists this year. Because again, I'm not saying what I don't care about Pedri's assists. I'm saying that I'm saying that what he gives you offensively again is sorely missed in the time that he's been gone, and he's been Barcelona's most important midfielder this season. I'm devout to that idea. But same thing with Gabi, his offensive output would be in complete question because of that box midfield four. Saying, okay, if you're going to start him on the left wing and you're not getting any offensive production from that in terms of like final goal contributions, you say the same thing on the other side with Rafinha, that at least all the guy does, he doesn't do much else, but at least it gives you something usually in goal contributions. But in the case of Lewandowski, if he was bought for those reasons, to take off pressure, to be a leader in the locker room, because we talk about his professionalism and we weren't just trying to gas people up. He does change cultures. So this team changed their culture to be consistent enough to show up enough times that looks like they're going to win the Liga. And if that's what he was bought for, then it was a success, right? And I think, the great soccer podcaster, Total Soccer Show's Dale Grove, rest in peace to him, said, things can be two things. And I love that saying. I'll always say it, and especially in the sport of football, things can be two things is such an important and powerful thing to consider, because Lewandowski, things can be two things. If you consider his transfer in one way, of course, it is an abject failure because of the high expectation that Barcelona has in Europe and in what they have for him from game to game. But if the point of Lewandowski was to raise your professionalism and win some trophies and score your goals to win the Liga, then of course, 100%, it has been a success. And you have to keep both those things in your mind.
Well, I think there was a certain what you're saying makes sense, and I agree in the sense, and it is two things, because also before Lewandowski came to Barcelona, before he was approaching his mid 30s, and when he was in his peak prime, the I don't want to say criticism, but I guess it is maybe that a little bit, but the notion that he will score you a boatload of goals. I mean, he's essentially, at Bayern Munich, it was, wasn't there the sense that he will score you an absolute boatload of goals and win you the league, but he hadn't turned in a signature Champions League performance for Bayern. And it even extends, and I understand, the Polish national team at the World Cup isn't, they're not world beaters, they're not expected to light up the scoreboard, but when you take the pitch with essentially, particularly not even this past year, but 4 years ago, the consensus, number one, number two, number 9 on earth, he not only hadn't scored in a World Cup for them. Like, it just, I remember I wound up watching all of their games in the Russia World Cup, and he didn't particularly threaten. I mean, it was one of those things where the biggest superstar on the Polish team was largely missing. Now maybe it was a question of service or this or that, but whatever it's been, before Lewandowski even got here, the one thing, the knock, if you wanted to say that, was he's not the guy who's going to take a Champions League semifinal or take the Champions League final by the neck and absolutely just make it his own. He is he's consistently excellent, and that's been his thing, and he's consistently great, but he'll just do it he'll do it from week to week. He doesn't necessarily have the gear on against a particular opponent or on a particular stage. So there had to be at least a little bit of an awareness of that in his track record and in his history. I mean, by and large, I think his arrival has been a success, because also I think Barcelona needed, and coming off of everything, the ongoing financial crisis and the departure of Messi and all of this, they needed a name brand superstar, and a new name brand superstar to choose Barcelona. And I don't mean even necessarily an up and coming excellent young player, like one of the guys, like one of the, whatever, 10 or 15, most recognizable names in the sport. And so he delivered that. There was I think he might have reinforced I don't want to say legitimacy, but kind of reinforced I guess maybe the legitimacy of Barca as a destination for superstars right now until the balance sheet is shored up. And and yes, he scored enough to take the league back from Real Madrid, which had to have been one of the top objectives this season, because I really don't imagine, if you put truth serum in people, I can't imagine many at the club were genuinely expecting even a quarterfinal run in the Champions League, let alone, semis or the final. Like the Champions League wasn't, lifting the Champions League trophy or even playing for it in the final wasn't legitimately an expectation. I mean, it shouldn't have been. And so, yeah, I mean, what I think Barcelona has gotten, if you want to say the transfer fee and this year's salary, I think that's fine. I feel like they've gotten what they paid for. If his back is starting to go and all that lies ahead of us is his mid 30s and kind of the inflection point where the mid 30s turn into the late 30s, and you're paying him 20 million a year, that's going to be a problem. And I don't know what you do with that.
Well, I think just focusing strictly on Girona. Yesterday I had said on Five Headlines, I want to think about whether or not we're going to not blame, but put some kind of onus on the individual in Lewandowski, or if I'm kind of again trying to have a referendum on the function and how you get the best out of Lewandowski. And what I landed on, thinking about that match more and more, was that functionally, as I kept saying about the personnel that was missing, particularly Pedri and Dembele, without those two, the expectations for Lewandowski and who he is kind of, not to say redundant, but I don't know how he succeeds because he is not a link up.
He needs service.
He is a number 9 in the box, and he's going to be able to get off shots in short spaces. I mean, even at the end of the game when Araujo plunges forward and gets into the box, gets that whatever it was off, and then Lewandowski is able to try that back heel.
Like a little back heel thing, yeah.
Right. I mean, even at that point, right, that's the kind of service that he just wasn't receiving all game long. And that goes on the responsibility of the wingers. And again, I don't want to ruin Thursday's conversation too early, but yeah, it's really significant that Balde was Barcelona's best winger early in the game. And then Alba coming onto the left wing, I'll give you a chance to talk about the substitution in a second, but, people weren't over the moon about it, but then functionally for Lewandowski, it made sense. It basically was Xavi putting on Jordi Alba to hope that Lewandowski got a goal. Like, regardless of the way the rest of the team was functioning, that was why that sub was made, because he can deliver a final ball in for Lewandowski. Because it is true, like, in your midfield, if you're going to start, especially the way that game was played, it's not a low block. So it was Girona willing to press and defend, and Barcelona doing very much the same thing on the other side. So two teams are willing to press high, that we're going to work hard to get the ball back and try to counter press and things like that. And those games don't necessarily, and they haven't really necessarily suited Lewandowski, which is a big reason why the counter pressing by top European side is something that seems to nullify a lot of what he can do when the personnel around him isn't at its top tier class. Like, again, if Pedri is out for those games, if Dembele is missing for those games, because that's not who Gabi is yet. And that's fine. I always say that's fine. I thought Roberto was fairly taken off at halftime. It's one of those things where I think it is kind of brave for Xavi to take a captain off at halftime, but Roberto was the worst player on that field of the 22 players on there, and he had to come off the field because functionally you were getting nothing, no service forward from him. You weren't getting any diagonal balls. He was just kind of running around behind the play. I mean, he was, if anything, he was better against Real Madrid, and he stunk the joint up against Real Madrid. So, but I thought he was somehow better against them. And the fact that Kessie didn't even start the game against Girona, I mean, that could have been a bit of fitness thing. And the plan was always to bring him in the second half. But yeah, I think performance-wise, he's pulled. It didn't really make sense. And I get the sense, I said in the headlines yesterday, that unfortunately, if I'm Barcelona, I would keep, even though he's on minuscule wages and Roberto's a depth piece, I would keep either Kessie or Roberto and not both. I would pick between the two. And I say, hey, if we need what should be next season your fifth midfielder, because you really are going to be going, that being Barcelona, going all in on Gundogan and try to bring him in. So we're also renewing Busquets, and there's no replacement coming for him this season. Yep. Nico is probably gone, but again, you only are saying we only need a backup, a fifth, right? It's a fifth or sixth.
Basically.
I mean, and then
so if we say what, Busquets, De Jong,
Pedri, Gabi,
and
then whoever it may be, Kessie or then Gundogan, if you're bringing in somebody else. Yeah. So now you're immediately talking sixth already. Yeah. And again, who knows what ALS Garrido, can he take a step forward to 20-year-old or whatever it have you? But the point is about Lewandowski, he was getting no service in the midfield whatsoever. And even in that game for Busquets, I mean, it befit the game for the personnel against Barcelona, because at home, you should say it doesn't matter the way the other team is playing. You just have to inflict your will. And so my frustration is that Barca could not inflict their will, and they kind of they allowed Girona to convince them to play their own game, which did not support the personnel they had. In that Busquets, we know, don't make it a track meet with Busquets. I mean, I thought he did an admirable job yesterday with ball recoveries, and he was fine. But also Busquets then offensively in an end-to-end game like that, the best thing he does is what he still does at an elite level more than almost anybody in the world, and that is deliver those long balls just in quick succession, just incredibly out to the wings. And that puts in all the responsibility on the winger in Rafinha to find a way to get it to Lewandowski. And that was not happening. And so Busquets is not getting the ball because Lewandowski can't run in those half spaces in behind, especially with the back injury. He just doesn't have the foot speed. Maybe he doesn't at all, but I'm saying with the back injury in particular, he cannot turn and beat a center back in a sprint with that long ball over
Right.
the top from Busquets. It's just not happening, especially with the fullbacks being able to pin in the way that Girona was doing it, right? They were setting up
Yep.
when Barcelona had possession to be able to bring those fullbacks in. That's why Arnau Martinez kept inverting, and I'll talk about
Yep.
that in a second. But
Yep.
if you're not going to have Lewandowski running in behind, that means Rafinha, you've got to figure out how to get to the ball to Lewandowski. And then Ansu the same way. Ansu kept trying to drop in, but Ansu wasn't really running in the middle channel. Instead, Lewandowski was, but it was, again, going to be unsuccessful because of the distance that he had to go to try to drop into those long balls. I mean, even Busquets, the one long ball that almost worked out was the one to Rafinha when Rafinha finally got in behind. So I do think that Girona, by playing up and down game against a midfield trio of Roberto and Gavi and Busquets, kind of nullified, those lines. Because if Barcelona cannot keep everything compact, not even now, they want to be wide, but they want to be compact vertically. And if they're going to be stretched out because the game is end to end, that means Lewandowski is not going to get any proper service whatsoever, and he becomes completely ineffective. So where I did land on that from the 5 headlines yesterday is that Girona played the way that supported them more than the way it supported Barcelona. I thought Michel did a great job with that, and that made Lewandowski completely ineffective because, Rafinha really did. I don't even know the proper word. In my Filipino mother-in-law says caca, and that is what it was. He just caca'd all over himself in front of the Camp Nou yesterday, and that was a big problem.
Yep. Yes. I think the point that you make about Lewandowski, and I do think it's right to, while pointing out that when he has an ineffective or even ineffectual performance, that all of the blame doesn't fall on him, because I don't think there's any. There's never been anything. There's no reason to question his. I don't know, his dedication, his work ethic, his fit. His actual physical fitness, and anything like that. The guy's out there. He shows up every game. He is clearly playing hard. He's trying. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't. At no point have I watched a game where he's had minimal impact and felt like he's mailed in the effort. But yeah, it's. But the thing is, he is such a central figure in the attack of this team that, like you said, when it's not structured correctly, it's your most significant. Your literal leading goal scorer, and essentially what is the fulcrum of your front line winds up, essentially becoming anonymous. And yeah, it's not his. I don't think it's his fault, but I do think that, like you said, maybe he never had that foot speed, to make some of those runs that you were referencing before. Or, when I say never, never as a member of Barcelona. But there was enough, and I understand the midfield was a much more robust place with Pedri and De Jong and everyone there, and Dembele was around. But there was a formula. He scored all of those goals prior to the World Cup. You know what I mean? And so it just, I think a combination of the knock-on effect of the other injuries, the lack of depth behind him, so that he's never been able to properly. I know he sat for whatever it was, a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, recently. But if he's in pain now, you're in a position where you should be able to sit this guy for a couple of weeks, let him heal. You're not playing in Europe anymore. Thankfully you've got a 13-point lead in the league with Getafe coming up. Like, he should be able to just get rest, go get acupuncture and just like lay on the couch for a week. But I don't know where he's too relevant. He's too important to the team, but he's also hamstrung by what the team looks like right now. it's a very annoying, it's a very irritating sort of catch-22 type situation.
Well, he is still Lewandowski, so he still does drag and gets the attention of two center backs. We saw last year what happened even in La Liga when you did not have a focal point to take all that attention, and the fact that Dembele even last year double, triple teams, and that is a thing that again, function wise, we'll talk about Rafinha, how he's constantly facing two players on that side because that left center back is going to slide over, and that does create problems for a player who's so left footed. But again, we'll deal with that on Thursday. Last two things before we go. Again, I think it'll be a quicker show here. That VAR goal line, Araujo Corner, is that a goal? Did that go over the line?
I don't think so.
I don't either.
Like I didn't see daylight between the ball and the goalpost. That was the best.
I
That
mean,
was the and it looked like there was enough of the ball, even if the angle wasn't completely optimal. The one that
yeah.
we got, it looked like there was enough of the ball still kind of hidden behind the goalpost where I don't think it was.
I don't either, but also Liga needs goal line technology. Like
Well, yeah,
that's
that was what I thought because I know that like in the Premier League, that stuff doesn't go to VAR because it either
yeah,
it buzzes on the referee's
that's right.
wrist
Yeah,
or it doesn't. So when they didn't do anything, when they just essentially, I didn't realize, to my own my own fault. I just assumed that the goal line
yeah.
technology was at least in the
It's
top five leagues
universal
in Europe or
because
whatever.
that's
I
what I
just thought it
thought.
was there.
Right, because then I
Yeah,
thought back to the times I'd used it in video form and found like an image of it, and I was like, wait a
yeah,
second, that was Champions League, that was World Cup, and
yeah,
and then they do, and we know we
yeah.
do in the Premier League when I watch those games. So yes, that is to me all that needs to be said about the goal line technology, whether that was off, because obviously once Mateo Lahoth, who actually had a pretty fine game for his standards yesterday, but again, I think Barcelona, unlike like Espanyol or Real Madrid, they're not taking a bite out of each other. Like I thought it was a pretty
Yeah.
I don't think either team. I mean, Girona also is not playing against relegation, not playing for the Europa League. They were kind of just playing for the win,
Yeah,
So
and they weren't playing like a sort of a blood and guts
correct.
Catalan derby sort of
Yeah.
situation. Like they weren't trying to, really bring the fight to Barca, and Barca
Yeah.
didn't, there didn't seem to be any animosity. And I
Right.
mean, I joked at one point. There was a point in the second half where I don't know what it was. It was like some sort of, I mean, very minor kind of kerfuffle, and Lajos was, in the middle there, and I think he might have given someone a yellow card, and he was, Busquets was, kind of not yelling at him, but they were, kind of debating a point. And I was like, oh man, he's done letting the game come to him. Like it's about to
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
the Lajos
No.
show. And
No. You
to
only
his credit, he let it just play out.
not a single yellow for a Barcelona player, even Gavi. Even though there was two different images I found with Lahoz talking to Gavi, so
Yes.
you know that he was warned aplenty, but he did not. He never got that yellow. But actually, I felt like Gavi actually was fouled. Remember he is the most fouled and done the most fouling in the league of this season, which is pretty
Yeah.
miraculous to be on both sides of that. So credit to Gavi, but yesterday was one of those where Gavi's number
He's
of
just an action fiend. I love
he
it.
is, yeah. The number of times he was fouled went up as opposed to the number of times he fouled. That one
Nice.
he stayed pretty stationary yesterday. But yeah, back to the VAR. If Lahoz, he's not going to call that a goal, like unless it was like obvious, because
Mhm.
I mean he saw what he saw, and so because it was not clear and obvious, VAR cannot overturn that. So
Right.
once it didn't matter that it went to VAR. Like once it was called not a goal, and we saw that first replay, you knew
Yeah.
that it was not going to be overturned.
It
That
wasn't obviously wrong. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
So because it was not going to be overturned, he had to have called that a goal initially. And the irony is, if he called that a goal initially and they take that to VAR, I also still the same way don't think they have enough to overturn it to no
Yes.
goal. Right? I think that
Yeah.
then is a goal. Like that is how close that was. So while you and I both, tongue in cheek said we don't think it went over, again, the same argument is that if he had said it went over, then it would have stayed and it would have been a goal because
Yep.
VAR could have done nothing about it. So the only
Yeah,
thing
that makes
I
sense.
say that needed to change and be different about that is that goal line technology should exist in the Liga, and it was almost to give both of us a wake up
Yeah.
call that it didn't exist. So
Yeah, because I was watching, I was like, oh, okay. No one's like, no one's super freaking out about it. So it must have been the whole like, he must have pointed to his wrist or something as they do in England, and everyone just kind of shrugged it off and,
yep.
and went about their evening. But I didn't. I only subsequently found out that it wasn't a thing.
Yeah. So last thing to talk about real quick here, because again, this probably doesn't matter at all. Arnau Martinez is likely going to Atletico Madrid, or he's going to somewhere wherever City Group wants to send him. Like he'll be bought by Man City and then loaned out or sold or whatever it is. But he likely is not coming to Barcelona, that being Arnau Martinez. There are no reports, there are no links. As a former La Masia player, as someone in Girona, he would be linked. He would probably be already done and dusted with that 20 million euro release clause. So he's not coming to Barcelona. Again, I think Atletico Madrid is the strongest rumor, and I would put some credence behind that. With that 20 million release clause, I've probably seen him 20 times plus I had mentioned the five headlines. I've always seen from Pong, and he's probably going to Manchester United, by the way. I've only seen him twice, and he defensively, I think there were some worrisome signs, but from what I saw again of Arnau Martinez yesterday, so it was taking from the game in the fall against Barcelona, this game now, and then all the other games in the middle that I've been watching in the Liga. Because again, if it's Real Sociedad, Girona, I've been tuning in. If it's Real Betis, Girona, I've been tuning in. Like there are 5 or 6 teams in the Liga that, especially when they play each other, those are the games that I try to tune in, right? Where it's like, okay, those are teams that, thankfully, I feel like are doing the Spanish league a good name. I feel like they're making me proud of saying, hey, watch that La Liga game as opposed to some of the other ones that I don't want to mention. But yesterday, being just 19 years old, even if that's who he is at 19, we talk about Gabi the same way. If that's who he is at 19, I can live with that player, and I think that player is worth 20 million euros. And the idea that he can improve, I also think my frustration is that I think if Barca go for him, because of his ability to invert as that pivot from that right back spot, that allows you to play a number of different ways. And I think that solves multiple problems. Because again, we saw those rumors for Amabat popping up this week. But if you renew Busquets, and you kind of know that you're probably going to get a very similar Busquets next season as well, like it's not like he's going to fix problems, but I also, at the level he is still at for what he does at an elite level, I can't imagine. It's almost like Steph Curry in the NBA. The drop off might not be that crazy because the skills he has that are elite are not going to drop off that much due to his age, right? Like he's making mistakes, but those mistakes are going to be mistakes that are going to continue because of his physical level because he's 34 years old or going to be 35. But even then, he still gets an amazing number of ball recoveries. It's just, again, the function of what Busquets doesn't do for you. Can you survive with a Messi, with a Lewandowski? Because again, those things all kind of those. Again, we'll talk about that on Thursday. But those pistons work together.
But it's hard to build your entire team of that, with that.
Yeah.
But
back to the Arnau point, I just
Yep.
I'm thinking about this player and saying, it seems like brain dead, but maybe he doesn't want to return for Barca for some reason. But he's mentioned them in the past as a Kool-Aid, so it's confusing to me that
I think one of his teammates even mentioned after the game, like I read some Aaron quote.
It's puzzling that those
someone mentioned that
Carrasco,
he'd be a great fit here. One of his teammates actually said that
Atletico Madrid is going to get him for 20 million euros. They paid a release clause, and then Barcelona's going to buy Carrasco for 18 mil to deal with their wing issue, which is an issue on the left side. Why is that going to happen? Like I have this sinking feeling that is going to happen. Why would you do that?
Why wouldn't Barca why not? I don't understand. Maybe there's something in the machinations here that I'm not fully hip to, but why would Barca not trigger? If you're going to spend 18 million, like you can scrounge around for the other two, right, and trigger this guy's.
I really
he's what you need.
I really think the club is pretty hellbent on, because of Christensen and Araujo and Koundé, saying Koundé is going to be playing a lot of right back, and Araujo is going to play right back on El Clasico or those big games against those those left wingers, and so Roberto is the third choice right back. I think, and Balde can play there too. I think that is what the club is going to afford with next season. And so again, it's one of those things where the club is choosing to renew Roberto and say, where else do we need to solve problems? And it seems like the club is saying Messi is going to solve our problems. Let's put all our faith in Messi. So, I mean, I think in a matter of a few weeks, I went from saying, okay, it's going to be, even if the club can only afford 2 or 3 players, they know where their places of need are. They know where their positions of need are. And we are barreling into this place where I go, what in the heck are they thinking for this summertime? And I think not say that Arnau Martinez is like a tipping point, but if they sign him on July 7th and they're like, oh, there were no rumors because we were keeping it quiet, but he had already agreed, right? One of those things where like they were able to keep that leak quiet and he winds up showing up. I will take a big breath and go, okay, maybe they do. Alemany, who I've trusted in the past, and Cruyff, maybe they have a vision. Maybe they see and enjoy the same players that I do, and they trust in the same players. But if it is no one is signed, and the club is like, well, we don't have any money, but then Messi shockingly comes on August the 8th, right? And it's like, that's the transfer that's done. And then Amrabat comes on a loan or whatever it is from Fiorentina on the last deadline day. It's like, yeah, I mean, it can show you that there is a way with the limited funds that Barcelona have that they can get this transfer window wrong, and getting this transfer window wrong, it can completely stunt this project and bring you no closer to your goals. And I think, not to say you have to get Arnau Martinez, but I look at the fullback, I don't know, I look at the fullback market, and 20 million for that kind of player is a deal. Like, you have to go for that player. He is in an elite company. I've said it. There's like 7 to 12 that kind of caliber young fullback at the right back position, and you've got to get one of them. It's musical chairs when it comes to that position. And there's only so many guys to go around. Like, that's why Barcelona were trying to get Cancelo, because there are only so many top level right backs and top level left backs. And thank God Barcelona has one of the top 3 left back prospects in world football and Baldy on the other side. But you got to be greedy now, and you got to make sure you got him on both ends, and you got to go for it, because there is no, and I've said it before, there is no Balde at the right back spot. There is no Gabi at the right back spot in the academy. That position does not exist for a few more iterations or cycles or generations. Like, that player doesn't exist yet unless they go out and find him at CF Dom, for a year or two or whatever, or they find him in, I mean, I don't think it's Julian Araujo.
Like you pull a Pedri and
exactly. But I don't think that player exists in the academy. And I don't think Julian Araujo was that player either. I think he could be a backup at Barcelona someday if he improves, but the early reports are not good on him anyway. But I just think you need a top level right back to have, what you don't know what happens. You don't know if Koundé and Christensen and Araujo, because you do only have 3 center backs. Like, Alonso and Eric Garcia exist, but that's what they do. They exist. The other 3 are your center backs for the next few seasons, and they're all great center backs for the next few seasons. Yes. But you need a right back who's designated as a right back, especially if one of those center backs go down. Because immediately, for the next 5 years, if Christensen picks up a knock, then Araujo and Koundé are your center back pairing, and now I want to see a right back. Like, that's what should happen, as opposed to throwing on Eric or Alonso or whoever it may be. Inigo Martinez even, who's going to be 31 next year, and they're getting him for a free transfer, which is fine. But if you're asking me, is it Arnau Martinez for 20 or it's Inigo Martinez for a free transfer? It's like, I mean, Arnau Martinez's wages are not going to break your wage structure. Like, no. I'm worried that Citigroup already has their talons into where he's going next, and that deal's already done, and that's why there are no rumors or anything. But I don't know. Again, it's just one of those things where very rarely do I put my neck out for this player. I complained about Chouamani for a while there and see how that turned out. But, very few players do I do this with. And so I end the show just by being like, okay, Barcelona, here's this kid, 3 hours away from you that, or by what is it?
Him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he was
like,
in your academy,
know him.
And he fairly let him go. But, fairly let him go to get better elsewhere. He chose to leave. Great. But, now he's ready to come back.
The price tag won't break the bank. The wages won't break the bank. He's young. He's good, and just, I don't know why, particularly, if there's anything to, like you mentioned, the Carrasco thing. And, I would much rather, I'd much rather wager 20 million euros on Arnau Martinez as your right back of the future than try to, throw more money at addressing the wings, because presumably, I mean, I know we're not talking Rafinha, but there may be a reconsideration of Rafinha come the end of the season. I mean, it just, right back is such a glaring need for this team. I mean, it's like you said, they have players that can deputize in that spot, and they have 3 excellent center backs who, can deputize in that spot. But why do you want to do that? I mean, if you can get this player, then you can just be kind of spectacularly deep at center back, and suddenly you have, a real kind of a vaunted defense, as successful as the defensive unit has been this season. I mean, at that point, that really looks like an all-around, a well-constructed, deep, and kind of scary defensive unit.
Because they haven't been deep in Europe and in Madrid. Like, they have not been deep enough. Like, one injury has thrown them into disarray in all of those major competitions. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the issue. But, all right. So that was Girona. That was Barcelona 0-0. I can't imagine we have anything more to say about that stinker of a game. But It's onward. 10 more matches, up by 13 in the table. Again, there's no jinxes, no nothing. We're just play it out, and hopefully, you don't rush those players back, but hopefully in a game or two they're going to be around for the last 6-7 matches of the season. You take care of business and you get out with the Liga title and the Spanish Super Cup, which is what this season is. So make sure you can keep following us along as do our best to get through the slog of the remaining of the season. And it feels silly, but again, embrace enjoy the finishing of this Liga title when the job
the home stretch. Yeah.
So anyway, we're Twitter, Instagram, you know where to find us everywhere and all that stuff on social media, YouTube as well. So again, I want to thank so much everybody for being on this ride, on this journey, on this adventure. But look out for us on Thursday again. And then thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Forza Barça.
Forza Barça.